Well, here we are back with the mystic and the nerd. And it's great to be in a space where we're engaging with some of the questions that are flowing through our community. And again, like we do every single time, we love to be able to sit with them and just process them out at a level that we can bring them to a level of understanding. So we're always up for more, aren't we? Just like
Always.
And there is never-ending curiosity that flows through this community.
No kidding. And every question that comes our way, I got to tell you, it gets me excited. I get giddy inside because they're questions I wouldn't have thought of, or maybe I have, but I haven't really answered for myself. So I love it. It's like a treasure hunt every time. So keep your questions and thoughts, even things that observations that you love or that you're seeing. We want to know why, and just lead to some conversation on that too.
Yeah. I think I always love to hearing where the question actually comes from in the person's story, because again, it could be just something you ponder over a cup of coffee in the morning, or something existential that you just go, wow, I wonder how that works. But it's got to, and usually comes from somewhere. And what is the deeper question, or what's the deeper itch that we're actually trying to scratch here? And anytime like you get one of your questions sort of been entered into, it's like you're asked to stretch your mind as well, because now you're starting to hear that question through other people's lenses. And in this case, for Jessie and I, that we will answer this through our own story. We will answer this through our own lens. And because of that, we get a broader understanding of what this might be. So the story behind the question, I think, is as equally as important as the question.
Yeah, so true. Well, if we had some of our friends here, we could ask them where this question came from that we're going to jump off with today. But we'll have to just fill in that. Actually, this one is kind of self-explanatory. How about this, just for fun? What's one of the hardest questions that I've asked you that have challenged you or stretched you? There's been a lot.
Well, it's interesting because I guess with the friendship that we share, Jess, we've both sort of entered into it with curious hearts and spirits as to we want to learn, we want to grow. Wherever we are up in our understanding of the kingdom, we're up for more. And I think part of doing the writing collaboration, where you're editing and illustrating, has brought up a lot of thoughts inside of that space of how do we get our heads around some of these things. And I think the biggest thing that is stretching us around is the understanding of what does God know, and how much does he know? If he knows all, which most Christians would just automatically say, yes, he does, then we get curious as how that actually works out in the Bible stories, and then how it works out in our stories. So I think doing this kind of thing, I think it naturally stretches us. It causes us to think of things, or for me to think of things that I've not thought of before, and go, I wonder if I put myself in Jessie's shoes, what would she be thinking about this very thing? And I think even in the writing process, hearing other people's take on some of the things that I'm writing, I actually really enjoy that. And often they're coming from areas that I've not come from. And so I love that the story can be bigger because somebody else's viewpoint gets into it. So so there's lots of thoughts around those aspects, Jess, that you've dropped into my spirit that I've gone, okay, let me just think through, how does this thing actually work? So lots and lots. How about you?
You've thrown a couple my way. I think we've probably both done this where we don't really have an answer, and we say something like, I'll have to think about that for a while. And we might just move on with our lives. There's been a couple of those moments. You might say, someone's been in the deep end today.
It's usually that I wake up and one of those thoughts is on my phone, and I'm like, I haven't caffeinated yet. So any answer I'm about to give you is going to be bleary-eyed as well. But I think too, like some of the stuff that we've been doing around the language of the ancients, it's really challenged with some of the ways I've understood some of the stories that we're actually interacting and navigating, and it made it a whole lot richer for me too. Because again, it's, when people say this is what it means in the Greek, and it could do, there are about 2,500 other things it could mean as well, but it could do, and you've helped me put better language around understanding so much of my understanding of what these words and thoughts mean.
Yeah, it's fun, and we're learning all these things together and in community, and it's just a blast. And most of these wouldn't happen if we didn't have your questions, because then we go looking and often end up in the language, and revelation just flows from there. I think that even happened today. Yeah, it did with one of our questions. I was going back and looking at the word for dwelt, and it's tabernacle. It can mean tabernacle. Anyway, so we'll get there. I don't want to rush ahead.
Well, what question we got first, Jess? Yeah,
let's kick off. So Hannah asks a lot of good questions. So today her family was watching the movie Moses,
Prince of Egypt.
Thank you. I couldn't remember. I had to scroll really quick. It's been a while. That's circa 1998. She said, good movie, by the way. But she was just making observations, right? So maybe when we're younger, we watch these movies with a little more awe and wonder. And then we get older and we start getting curious. How did that actually work? Is that in the Bible? So as they're watching this movie, she says, in the story, it's the first demonstration of the power of God to Pharaoh in that moment where the magicians are turning their sticks into snakes. And just wondering, how do Pharaoh's magicians have that ability to do the same thing that Aaron and Moses are doing? Hannah, just so you know, I thought this was a perfect question for the mystic to handle today.
Well, I think too, with a question like this, there's my brain goes in two different directions as well. Most magicians these days work in the art of illusion, and if they can have you believing something, then you'll take hold of that as truth. And so there's some of the things that that Pharaoh's magicians were able to do seem to replicate the very things that God was doing through Moses, but at a time that ran out. And the way I read that is like their illusions ran out. So that caused Pharaoh to think one way. And again, like when you see magicians online and you watch things and you go, how on earth did it happen? It does look like something mystical or magical actually just occurred there, because my brain can't understand how that happened. And then you have people get on there to say, let me just share with you how magicians make these things happen. And you start seeing the illusion that is unraveled inside of there. And I think in the story of Moses and Pharaoh, the illusion got to the point where they could not sustain it anymore. And Pharaoh's like, right, like this thing is not working. The other angle too is that if you believe in the power of God and you understand in the power of evil, you do know that there are some very dark things that occur inside of our world at a spiritual level. And throughout time, people have tapped into those things and seen very significant physical manifestations of what that can be. And so I don't doubt that can happen, and maybe it did happen back then as well. So but the whole story is wrapped around the concept that they got to a point and they're like, we can't sustain this anymore. And as God has shown, his grace will go far and then go far again. And so inside of this story, God was with Moses, demonstrating things that were undoing the Pharaoh, and he was trying to find a benchmark for what that might be compared to what his own people are doing, because if his own people are doing better things or greater things, then he's not going to be listening to Moses at all, because we got to the end of that road and decided that, wow, we can do some of those things, but not all.
Yeah.
Like, I think when it gets to the place of plagues and whatnot, how do you actually sustain all of those sorts of things in an illusion? Very difficult. And even if you go down the aspect that this was evil at work, you get to the point where evil has a limitation where God has none.
100%. It's been a while since I've read this too, so I had to kind of go back and reread it, but I think you're exactly right too. And that's where I landed, Hannah. It's just in the context of that story, it's addressing over and over Pharaoh's inability to see. So even when Moses is doing this, he's calling and putting his faith or trust in what he sees in the things that probably he has. Sorry, I'm getting more theological thoughts in my head, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But he's putting his trust in something that's not God, and it runs its course. But when I did make this observation when I was going through all the plagues and everything that came forward. So first observation is when the Aaron's staff turns into the snake, and then the magicians come and theirs turns into the snakes. Theirs gets devoured. I mean, that's just such a great demonstration. But the point of the story is that Pharaoh still, his heart was hard and still wouldn't see. And then the second time is frogs, or no, the water to blood. When they turn the water to blood, and the sorcerers do it too. Apparently, I'm trying to envision that. But then it says Pharaoh's heart was too hard, still didn't see. And then the next one is the frogs, and it looks like the magicians can call the frogs forward too. But I like what you've said with the illusion. Now I'm kind of reading this with a different lens, because then when they get to this point where God sends gnats, it just says that they couldn't create gnats. And what they respond is, yeah, this is clearly God's finger. Like the sorcerers are even saying, okay, we can't do this. This is God. And Pharaoh's heart is still too hard. Flies come, livestock is killed. Now the magicians aren't even mentioned. Like they're not even in the picture until God sends boils and sores. And it says that the magicians couldn't even stand before Moses now because they were covered in the boils and sores. So you just do see that succession of their limitation, because God is revealing who he is in that. I think probably because we've been in John for so long too, and thinking of a hard heart is really our inability to see and hear and believe.
Yeah.
And just noticing that what's happening is that hardness. Pharaoh's seeing the miracles, but he's refusing to believe.
Yeah. See, my own mystical question inside of that space of that whole story is around God hardening Pharaoh's heart at times. And Jess, it'd probably be an interesting word study in Hebrew to understand that at a better level. But when people say, why did God harden his heart? And there are other times where he hardened his heart. So I can understand very clearly the concept of us hardening our heart because we see something we just choose not to believe in or we choose not to engage with. We harden our hearts to it. It's the same deal like if in relationships and friendships, if we harden our heart to somebody, we're no longer seeing them, we're no longer believing in them. But when God does it to us, it's a completely different conversation. And because we're so many years outside of that time of that moment, we make assumptions over to it, and often our assumptions are based on fault, right, wrong, rather than God. And so there's a bigger question inside of there, Jess, which is at times theologically very difficult to get your head around, a God who hardens the heart of Pharaoh or others.
You know, even to add more theological mystery to this, I think it's Exodus 7, verse 1, maybe. It says that God says to Moses, I will make you a god or like God, and Aaron will be your prophet. And if Pharaoh, I'm no Egyptian expert, but Pharaoh's, they believed they were God, right? That was part of the
It was
language. But so when I read that today, because that is a really hard place to understand, God hardening someone's heart if he's given us free will and whatnot, and this big choice discussion we have so often. I was wondering if God has made Moses his representation on earth, and Moses is basically being what Pharaoh believes him to be, wouldn't his heart just be hard every time he sees a miracle? Like God's making his heart, but just because he is of his glory and who he is challenging Pharaoh in all those places. Like I read it, not that, more of descriptive, not prescriptive. I don't know. I might be taking that out of context. A deep word study would be helpful, and look at some other commentary on that. But
Well, I think too, like it's very difficult to judge a situation based on the fact that we're so far out of it. We don't understand it. But if you've ever had those times in your life where someone's always telling you about what God's doing and this and that and this and that, and he's not, you don't feel like he's doing it to you, it's easy to feel like, well, my heart is hardening, and is it me doing it or is it God doing it? Because I'm asking the same prayers, but that person seems to be getting them and I'm not. So what's going on with that? And so again, context is very important in all of this stuff as too. So you got Pharaoh who thinks he's God, or a deity, and you have a guy coming in who has been told by God you are going to be like God, and you've all of a sudden got a battle that the Marvel universe should probably have a look at, because we've got these two demigods, if not gods, that are actually having this extraordinary spiritual moment inside of that as well. And when God hardened Pharaoh's heart, it just simply could be because Pharaoh's like, no, like I'm still bigger than you. I'm bigger than you. And it's like God saying, well, let me show you something. And Pharaoh's like, no, I'm not doing that. And so I think when there's a hardened heart, it's never just a one-sided affair. Like in any relationship that goes south, it's never as if, or it's rarely one person. It's usually communication's gone missing in action somewhere along the journey. And before you know it, the hearts have been hardened.
Yeah. See, this is just how our conversations go. It's like we take it and just kind of look at it from all these different angles, right? Take something very one-dimensional and throw some 3D to it. Like,
well, later this year, I'll be in Egypt.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I might be able to sit with one of these kings and just go, hey, what's the deal? Well, they tell me King Tut's still there. His body is there, and we can actually see it.
No
and I really don't have a strong desire to see a 3,500-year-old mummy. Well, he's out of his mummification, out of his robes, whatever that is. Anyway,
that'd be so cool. Well,
there's a left turn at Albuquerque for you right there.
Do a live. Please do a live from Egypt. Talk some more about this. Show us King Tut live. All right. Well, this is another good mystic question for you, Matt.
Yep.
Because you are so good at symbols, meaning, dreams, interpretation. So the second question to this is, why did God wait 40 years before sending Moses to confront Pharaoh, outside of the timing stuff, like Moses meeting Zipporah and having children waiting for the previous Pharaoh to die? 40 years seems like a really long time. And I'm sure to the Hebrews 2, I cut off the question. I'm sure to the Hebrews 2, let me get back. They were asking the same or similar questions. This last part of that is, what is the significance of the number 40 in a biblical or scriptural context? Put that in there for you.
Yep, 40 is a big deal inside of the Bible, and you see it pop up fairly regularly. Even the children of Israel going into the wilderness for that length of time. 40 generally represented a generation, Hannah. And so a generation would have to come and go. So by the age of 40, the next generation's having their kids and creating family and things like that as well. So when you see number 40, whether it's exactly 40 to the day, I doubt it, but it's in that space of a generation has come and gone, or not gone, but a new generation has come. You're also inside of a place where people seem to live beyond the age of 100 as well. And so you have this interesting concept that even though these days I think we're starting to push further up with our life expectancy as well, but 40 generally was a number that was considered a generation. It's also a number that is linked to new life, as in pregnancy, 40 weeks. And so when you see that number pop up, there's something about new life coming. There's a new generation. There's new something that's actually occurring after 40 years in the wilderness. They have a new offer to step into the promised land that they were originally given. And so 40 is a big deal. In our culture today, it's an interesting age because often people talk about our 30s, 40s, and 50s, which, Hannah, you're still years away from getting there. And 40 does seem a long time to you, but for someone who's 54, it's come and gone pretty quick. And for someone else in this actual conversation who's about to turn
40,
I didn't say.
I don't want to say it out loud. I'm still in my 30s.
And you got months of still in that space. Months. And but 30s are often what they call our planning years. Our 40s are our building years, and our 50s are our legacy years, as the people like to say. That's in our culture. That's not a biblical principle, but it's something that we've discovered in the time that we're living in. And I wonder, inside of that, Hannah, whether when Noah got into his 40s, this was now time to plan. So in the first 40 years, there was a lot of life experiences that we see. He grew up. He was effectively sent away by his mum to be brought back into that place, but he was raised in Pharaoh's home, which for a Jew was an extraordinary thing to have happen. So he was raised in privilege and not in poverty, but then a turn of events and he stands up for a man or a Jew and kills a person and then goes on the run for those 40 years. And it's in that generation we have Moses coming back to that. We've got Noah on the mind. We have Moses coming back to that place of going, okay, it's time now to plan for whatever's next. In that space, he has kids. He meets Zipporah. He discovers that being a shepherd is the thing that he's doing. And in that space, somewhere along the lines, he sees a burning bush and his life takes a turn again. So it's a really interesting number inside of the biblical context, Hannah, and a great question.
Such a good question. And actually, so I was just reading, I fact-checked a few of these, but feel free, listeners. But people say that, so Moses' life can be made up in 3 different 40s. So then at 80 is when he is called to free the slaves. And then at 100, and then 40 years of wandering in the wilderness after that. So 40 years up, or 40 days on Mount Sinai. And I didn't realize it was 40 days that he sent the spies into the promised land.
And 40 days of rain.
40 days of rain. Another one that caught me off guard. Goliath taunted the Israelites for 40 days. Did you know that one? There was a couple. This was another fun one. Saul, David, and Solomon all reigned for 40 years.
A generation. Yep.
And then there's Jesus as well.
Who didn't make 40?
He didn't, but he did fast for 40 days in the wilderness. He was here after the resurrection for 40 days. There's a lot around prophets too for 40. Jonah warned Nineveh for 40 days.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
And they say there's 40 different authors in the Bible.
I didn't know that one. There you go.
All right. Yes. We like to learn new things.
I do.
Good question. So anything else? Yeah, the timing stuff. I mean, if we look at, why do you think numbers matter to God? Why do you think timing, and just looking at the number of ways that we see 40 throughout Scripture, why do you think that matters to God? Now, this is just us having a conversation. Obviously, we don't know, but.
Well, particularly the number 40 for generations, I think that's that's part of the meta narrative of the whole biblical experience. This was a story that would flow through the generations of people, generation after generation, 40 years after 40 years after 40 years. And so I just think that when you start seeing things that speak to generations, it's a big deal. Like numbers, seasons, all of these things are of his creation. And if anything is of his creation, then I look for meaning in it. And I love to find that. And with a number like 40 that is so repetitive inside of scripture, that you've got to go, okay, let's just take a moment to think why this is such a heavy number. And so, like, even numbers like 3 that people often connect with the Trinity inside of that, and 3 crosses that stand on top of Calvary and things like that, you start seeing these things start floating to the surface, and you ask yourself the question why as well. And like, if that means something to you, Hannah, then I'd be asking you, what does 40 mean to you other than being really old?
Wait a minute. Young, wise,
Mature. No.
mature. Maybe in my 50s.
Well, I'm there, and I'm still not sure.
Still working on it. Well, thanks for your questions, Hannah. That was fun. All right. So right now we are coming up to Easter. And in the community, we've been having some great conversation around Easter. And our friend Deb asked this question yesterday. She said, I'm struggling with if Jesus ascended into heaven and is coming again, so therefore he is in heaven, yet we talk how he is with us, beside us, which is correct? I love this question.
I'll get nerdy on it first.
Okay. Well, I was reading in John 14 today, just, what is it? John 14:17. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him or knows him. You know him because he abides with you, and he will be in you. I was just kind of looking at that for like a proof text of God being with us now, but God abiding in us, and just kind of sitting with what is abiding. How can he be abiding in multiple places at one time? Like you said, Deb, which is correct. But it brought me back to John 1 and how the word became flesh and dwelt among us too. And the word for dwelt is eskenosin. And the root word is skeno. And it means to fix one's tabernacle, have one's tabernacle, abide or live in the tabernacle tent. Tabernacle, to dwell, to live. And I was just trying to think of just biblically, what is the tabernacle? What does that mean? And how is Jesus abiding, dwelling, living? So I went back to, in that root word, in the Hebrew. Did I make that clear that that was a Hebrew root word? Because I went to the Greek. What was the Greek? Yeah, no, I'm totally screwing it up. Eskenosin was the Greek. And then I did it anyway. Wow, getting so off track. The key to this conversation is that, oh no, that was the Greek. Shakan. I wanted to find the Hebrew equivalent. And the Hebrew had 2 words. Shakan was lived, remained, like it also tent, dwelling, all the same things as the Greek word for it. But it also meant remain and stay. And those were the 2 I was just kind of sitting with. Dwelling can also mean remaining and staying. And how Jesus came, he tented with his people. He dwelt among them in the flesh. But then that element of him in the Holy Spirit, in and through the Holy Spirit, that he is remaining in us, with us, tabernacled to our hearts.
Tabernacle to our hearts. That is pretty nerdy.
I know. You know. Yeah.
Just roll that one by your kids after you finish the session and see how they look at you. I'd be interested in their response.
Yep. Well, I'll just go with the Greek and the Hebrew. Espinosan and Shokan.
Love it.
Yeah.
So for me, Deb, there's a couple of thoughts in there as well, and I love where Jess has gone with this as well, because like when you go, what's correct, what should be thinking, finding it in God's story, the Bible, is for me that's the centerpiece of what we do, and what Jess has just done is absolutely beautiful. Thoughts about heaven and hell, if I can just drop that in there as well. The Middle Ages created aspects of that the Bible seems to be fitted around rather than, in my interpretation, looked at first. And so the church would use those aspects of heaven and hell in their preaching very strongly to get converts to come into Christianity. And it's, if you've read Eden's Blueprint, which I know you have, Deb, when I talk about at the church, in churches, we've actually scared people out of hell rather than love them into heaven. So much of that is generational inside of church teaching, where we have used the mechanism of fear to create a picture of hell that the church effectively created. Like I remember going into one church here in Sydney, Jess, in a suburb I used to live in, and as you walk in the door, there's this huge picture of hell, like painting of hell, like, and you just walk in there and you go, "Whoa,
Yeah.
I did not expect that." And but it's the concept that it frightens you, it scares you, and people go, "Yes, but you need to know about hell." Absolutely, but you don't need to traumatize people to get them to become Christians. Jesus said, "Love them," as well. And so some of our theologies around heaven and hell, of heaven being up in the sky and hell being down below in the ground, you can trace those back into even Jewish and Hebrew times, of the way that they saw that. Like when you read some of the scripture of water, they can talk about the abode of the dead as the water, which is one of the reasons why I think the disciples were so freaked out about drowning. But these aspects of heaven being away from us, or from a distance, as Bette Midler would say. Can I drop Bette Midler in the same?
Yeah, you can.
Don't really like the song, but it's theologies like that keep God away from us rather than with us.
Yeah.
So do what Jess has done and go to the Bible and discover this rich word of abiding, or tabernacling with your
Yes.
It's good, Jess. Like it's good. It's one of the reasons why I love hanging out with you. It's like, get a tabernacle our hearts every now and then. I don't even know if I'm using that properly. If I'm not, forgive me. But inside of this, you've got Jesus saying things like, "I will never leave you nor forsake you."
Yeah.
Like, how do you get around that and not think that Jesus is with us? Like the whole parables of, if you get lost, don't worry, I know where you are, and I'm going to bring you back on my shoulders with joy. It's not as if there is a distance or a separation, and Paul comes along and says, "Hey, nothing actually separates us."
Yeah.
Not angels, not demons. Nothing separates us from his love. And so, which is correct? Well, God is present, God is here. The Bible also indicates that Jesus is doing a work eternally of a new heaven and a new earth. Or in John 14, "I'm going to prepare a place for you." And so it gives indication there is something utterly amazing that is ahead of us, and extraordinary part of the continuation of our eternal story, which we will get to be a part of and be thrilled to do. But inside of that, Deb, for me, the presence of God and heaven is with us. Heaven, the kingdom is here. When Jesus says, when people are casting out demons and doing all of these kinds of things, just know that the kingdom is here. And I think the separation of heaven and us, I don't think there is a thing. I think that we are and can be in the place of the heavenlies at any given time. And it doesn't take much for me to get there. It's a walk on the beach. It's a walk through the mountains. It's sitting down with good friends to discover love in those really deep and rich places. And you get to see the abiding God who's living within us, providing for us, creating into every realm that we can see, hear, taste, smell. I just think that there's no separation at all.
Agreed. And isn't that what God did? Not to bring everything back to the tabernacle, but because that's where my brain went today. Just thinking of, there's this part of God that was so terrifying and so glorious that the people were so afraid. And just kind of that intimacy of being able to have Moses make a tent that God could come and dwell, and the tent of meeting and this tabernacle that, it becomes just this holy space. And to think that Jesus came and that he is pitching that tent in our hearts and all this. And it brings me back to the woman at the well too. And Jesus just saying there, you don't have to go anywhere to worship. It's not on that mountain. It doesn't matter which mountain you're worshiping now. It's not about that anymore. It's different. It's about this living water.
Yeah. I think too, just like even when, when David comes along and says, I want to build your temple, and God's like, what?
Yeah.
The earth is my footstool. Like, how big is this thing you want to build? Because you can't. I love that aspect. And I know there's a little bit of humor inside of it, but even when he chose to dwell in a tent, it's just like, David's like, you've got to be better than that. And God's like, why?
Why? Yeah.
Why? Maybe God likes camping. I don't know. But
maybe that's where I get my love for camping. Yeah. Well, I guess I love the image that a temple you can't pick up and move. It doesn't move with the people, and I love that idea. Even in the wilderness, it was just the tabernacle, the tent moved with the people.
Yeah.
God moves with his people.
Well, even that time with Moses, when the Bible says God changed his mind, like, God's like, right, I'm out. I'm done. I'm finished with you guys. I'm going to save you, Moses, but I'm going to wipe everybody else out again. We're going to do this whole Noah thing again. And Moses is like, no, if you're not going, well, if you're not coming, we're not going. And it's that idea that Moses got it. Like, wherever God is, that's where I want to be. And the Bible says God changed his mind and said, yeah, great point, Moses. Like, let's just see how we can work this thing out. That's my little interpretation through an Aussie way of saying.
I like it.
The translation of the Bible.
But even reading that, I think Moses would be a person I'd like to meet. Even reading the way that he was praying for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tricks him. He's like, if you tell God to stop with these plagues and I'll let everyone worship the Lord. And Moses is like, all right. So he goes and prays for Pharaoh. God listens to Moses. And then Pharaoh hardens his heart, does it again. And Moses is like, don't you trick me this time. That's my interpretation. It's like what I say to my kids. I trust you, but don't you abuse that trust. And then he does it again. But then he still goes and prays for him again. Moses seems like a great guy. Well, that's it for Bible questions, but maybe that could be our next segue into what are some of the people of the Bible that you guys wish you could have a conversation with?
Yep. Yep. And it should be what some of the people who are alive today that you'd like to have a conversation with. So don't wait till they're checked out from Earth. Like, what people would you like to sit down and say, tell me a story? And if you're willing to listen to a person's story, listen to all of it. The good, the bad, the hard, the challenging, the beautiful, the wonderful. Don't listen for the story as a superhero, as in often we interpret in the Bible of this extraordinary man named Moses who effectively didn't do anything wrong. He murdered a guy, but yeah, you know what? That's okay. Like, part of a redemptive story.
I think he complained a lot. Like, I feel like he's a relatable figure. Yeah. He got burnt out. He got stressed out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, like, look for the entire story in a person, and it's an incredible way of loving them. If you can listen to a person's story without judging them,
Mm.
you'll learn to love them better. So even when they share where they've messed up in life or screwed up in life, that's them trusting you with
Mhm.
some very precious information and allowing a relationship to build. Now, I think if we got the chance to sit with anyone from the Bible, I would want to be listening to all of their story.
Mhm.
How did you walk through that? How did that happen? Were you anxious? And why some of the things I'm writing are asking those questions. Like, were you anxious about that? Like, it appears that you've just gone, no, we're going to go across that river and the sea's going to split.
Mhm.
Did Moses have a big, deep breath in to go to God, you better show up now,
Mhm.
because I'm going to look like an absolute fool if I stand here and raise my staff and nothing happens.
So true. Hmm. Relatable.
Mm.
Well, this is the Mystic and the Nerd. Keep your questions coming.
Yeah. Yep. If it's a question to you, it's something that will be a question to somebody else as well. And I think our prayer too is that it causes you to ask more when
Mhm.
you learn more. And it's a beautiful thing to sit in a community where your questions are listened to,
Mhm.
valued, and that we can explore them with you.
Mhm. And if you have a fear, you don't want to ask the question because you think you should know it, please don't feel that way.
Yeah.
That's
Sounds
how
good
I
to me.
felt most of my life. Please ask the questions.
Yep. Well, that's how I felt in when I was in college, at Bible college, because again, the last thing you want to be is humiliated in front of a whole bunch of people, of other students, but everyone in that room is there to learn.
Yeah.
And if the person at the front intimidates you to stop you from asking questions, then you're not in a safe learning environment.
Yeah.
And Jess, you and I both chatted about some of the lecturers we had. Some were really great and some were really challenging to be a part of. And the ones that were really great, 3 hours of a lecture disappeared in what seemed to be moments, where 3 hours of intimidation seemed to be like a
Yeah.
full day, and you're hungry and your stomach's growling. And back then our phones weren't as good as they are now, so you couldn't scroll.
Oh no.
Who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought? All right.
Cool. Thanks for hanging out with us, everyone. Jess, it's been an absolute joy as always to do this sort of stuff. And we shall be back again soon. Bye for now.